Hello. Our story begins with some much needed exposition. 300 years before the Blockade of Naboo, smack in the middle of the High Republic, the Sith fell apart. As is true with Sith tradition, greed destroys all. The Sith, after surviving by the end of a fingernail for nearly a millennium, crumbled. A Sith Lord demanded loyalty from his apprentice, and it was received, until said apprentice learned of the Sith Lord's other Padawan. Both students believed they were the only one, because the rule of two demands that only a master and an apprentice be the two Sith, one to kill the other so that the cycle could be completed. At this revelation, the two apprentices fought the Sith Lord, and inadvertently, each other. The Elder Lord believed he could create two structurally different Sith paths, one of the tradition, as Lord Bane created it, and the other of royalty. At this current point, the dreams of a Sith Chancellor or a Sith-orchestrated galactic-scale war were nothing but non-existent. So on one side of this duel, there was the ferocity of traditional Sith tactics, meshed with the wisdom of eons past. On the other, a new regime meant to destabilize the Republic, following the inevitable collapse of its golden years. In this duel, the Sith Lord died first, slain by his first original apprentice. Following that, the survivors interlocked and fought to the death, though there was no confirmed death. The only sign of passing was falling off a cliff edge. The victor continued the path of the Sith, the traditional one that their treacherous master instructed them down. This path would lead to the rise of Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious. On the other side, the survivor, the one who had not been trained from birth, the one set up to fail in an engagement due to a lack of warrior-based training, created a new lineage, the Royal Sith family, an extension of the Rule of Two. A long-lasting alliance between the Sith was bred. The individual that started this path came from the royal descent on the outer rim world of Barros. The system was just south of Lothal, and like Lothal, not connected to any major trade lane or hyperspace route. The Sith apprentice, wounded and marred from their duel, returned home and started the creation of the Path of Royals, a distinct section of the Sith, meant to hide them from the other Sith, the Jedi, and the Galactic government. And so for the next 300 years this path grew. Royals across various star systems intermingled, married off children, created loyalty, trade routes, alliances, all under the banner of the Republic. This Sith path was perhaps more difficult than the Baneite lineage. It relied heavily on finding royal heirs with exceptional talents with the Force. Though what became the struggle is these royal children weren't always up to Baneite standards. However, the original Sith of the royal lineage confiscated holocrons and relics that could be used to create monsters of the Force, whether it be the Mask of Momin or the Mask of Exem Panchard, perhaps the lightsaber of Exar Kun or the holocron of Darth Malgus. They ended up in this lineage. These devices, framed around being royal heirlooms, passed to other regal households and systems. In the age of the Republic, alliances or trade partners were not uncommon. These alliances were long-standing, building closer and closer to a dominating regime, and one key point of interest in this lineage was their lack of interest in the Rule of Two. The best way to create distinct roots of trust and alliances were formed through families, married children, cousins and siblings sent to different planets, truly barbaric in its form, but masterful to create a truly aligned Sith regime. While over the span of these 300 years, the Sith royal house grew, it also slowly shrunk as fast as it sprouted. In the early days, mere decades after its founder passed into the Force, there were sometimes 30 to 40 different Sith at a time. Those numbers had since dwindled, but the loyalty remained. Powerful shipbuilders on Mon Calamari pledged allegiance to the Sith without even knowing it. Zygerian slave empires bent the knee to this royal house. Mun bankers from Scipio owed debt to these brilliant aristocratic houses, and thus the prize finally found them. After years, decades of building towards this moment, there was finally an heir to capture that one system that was needed to unify it all. The original Sith in the royal house wanted Mandalore. At the time, they were undergoing social reforms that would lead to the next dozen or so civil discourses and eventually wars. So the Sith never found individuals that either lived to adulthood or actually could use the Force until now. Due to the nature of this Sith sect, it was founded in monarchical respect. Regal houses from across the stars always congratulated other aristocratic domains when their children were born. This is how the original knew how to start this regime without the Bainite Sith knowing. They had been bred through the practices of kingdoms in the High Republic era, and thus Mandalore's new heir, Satine Kryze, was brought into the Sith. She was the Palpatine of the royal lineage. With a midichlorian count of over 18,000, she was the perfect Sith to become the next Lord. What had also become an interest to the modern royal house was the location of other Sith. Due to the long-standing royal connections on Scipio, the royals knew where the Bainite lineage had gone. There were rumors about a potential apprentice from either Malastare, Naboo, Anarch, Farstein, or Zar. They didn't really know, but they did know that Hego Damas II was no ordinary banker. Thanks in part to the relationship held with the secret society of royals, they knew about Plagueis the Wise to some capacity. They followed him, kept tabs on his activities. Palpatine was one of many suspected apprentices of Plagueis, but they didn't really know. As a means to avoid interacting with the Bainite lineage, which undoubtedly forgot about this splinter group because the original was meant to be dead, the royal lineage decidedly avoided that area of the galaxy. They had no intention of running into Plagueis' student, whoever he might be. It's the only reason that the current Sith Lord knew about Satine, let alone ever found her. Like every Sith in this royal lineage, Satine would be raised by an assortment of loyalists, perhaps better stated as cultists. The royal Sith lineage was built off a system of loyalty. Without it, they wouldn't be as widespread or accepted as they were, mostly because they didn't position themselves as anything other than wealthy aristocrats. While sure, Plagueis and Palpatine came from powerful and rich families, it didn't amount to the vast regal capacity as this sect of Sith religion. It truly was a royal family, built by generations of various houses collecting their vast resources and putting it towards one solid goal. Thus, Satine was raised within her own clan on Mandalore. But due to the growing alliance between Magistrate Sishi, the current Sith Lord, and Satine's father, Satine was raised by a collection of trusted cultists. Satine's life wasn't really any different with the Sith involved, aside from her training. All of her political savviness would be learned from her father, and her combat skills would be adopted by the cultists, who had various forms that the Mandalorians had never used. As another note, the keen interest for adding Mandalore into the royal lineage was due to its militaristic history as a powerhouse. Nowadays, Mandalore stood as a system with political influence. That remained the one thing bogging down the new Sith. Their allies weren't exactly built for all-out long-term war. That would be a burden for the new Sith generation to complete. By the time Satine turned 17, she was well equipped with knowledge of the Sith. Mandalore had been a part of the royal house for nearly a decade by this point, and the eventual Duchess was a well-adapted Force user. Neither her father nor her sister knew. As Magistrate Shishi told her, it was for their protection. Satine had no problem keeping her mouth shut and hiding the secret. She watched, listened, and observed. The quiet resilience that would have turned Duchess Satine into a powerful advocate for peace instead made her a cunning adversary. She wasn't permitted to fight in the Mandalorian civil war that erupted, the one that claimed her father's life, but she watched it. As a result, she was forced to flee, but not before the Jedi could be called to Mandalore. Despite Clan Kryze's new alliances, the system was too new to this pact started by the Sith, so they didn't get reinforcements. It was not the burden of the Sith royal lineage to help Mandalore solve its crisis, so instead, they let the Mandalorians fend for themselves. Though this reaction from the alignment didn't come because of stinginess, it was a reaction. The Mandalorian Council of Elders that served with Satine's father saw it most fit to protect the future Duchess with Jedi oversight, rather than the cultists. Satine, after growing up hating the Jedi, was paired up with a Padawan, an individual that she with her current level of training could dispatch if she desired, but she didn't. Her traits of observation kept her steady as she and this young Jedi shipped off to the moon of Concordia to avoid assassins and warriors. She did not travel with her lightsaber, nor her holocrons. Instead, she meditated, as much of the new Sith sect built their focus off of harmony with the dark side. Though what became the most unnerving part about this experience for Satine was her growing interest in Kenobi. She was far from a damsel in distress, but she wasn't beyond communicating for the sake of being bored. That's how most of their conversation started. She was more so curious about the Jedi sect, because she had heard so much about it from the cultists that raised her in the dark arts. Kenobi didn't sense the swelling dark side from the future Duchess, so their conversations became deeply philosophical. He talked about the Jedi and his perspective of the Sith, another reminder that no one, not even the Jedi, knew about the royal lineage. It was a complete secret to the galaxy. Only the aligned houses knew about it, and even most of them truly didn't understand the importance of their alliances. As the year of protection went by, and the seasons on Concordia, Mandalore, and Kalevala changed, Satine developed an understanding and respect for Obi-Wan. She would consider him an ally, because while she never went out of her way to discuss the Sith or the dark side, he did become interested in the mysticism she called Mandalorian arts. The Mandalorian arts were the basic Sith teachings she learned from the cultists and the Magistrate, the current Sith Lord. To Obi-Wan, he never considered that these could be related to the Sith, so instead he listened and became cultivated. Just as his heartstrings were turning, his mind became absorbed by interests in Satine. It was a slow seduction to the dark side. However, Satine recognized the importance of an alliance like this. She wouldn't just let Obi-Wan return to the Jedi Temple. She could feel the growing adoration he shared for her, some of which she felt similarly. Instead of just developing this dynamic for a year and letting it pass, she would force it to life. Kenobi waited for her to say the word, and she did, before they ever returned to Mandalore, before the war ever ended, and she said that word. And thus, Qui-Gon, once everything came to a bitter conclusion, returned to Coruscant without his apprentice. Kenobi was love-struck, and Satine established a firm connection with Obi-Wan's master, a communication straight to the heart of the Jedi Temple, if you will. There also was one more important detail about the Civil War in Mandalore. Satine's already struggling connection with Bo-Katan became even more estranged. Their father had also died. Two people that Satine truly loved were ripped from her, and she used that pain to delve deeper into the dark side, as her future Duke consort abandoned the Jedi Order to join the Duchess and her people for their reconstruction. In a few meetings with the Magistrate, Satine would identify her plans, and how she had mastered an understanding of communication. These were lesser thoughts to the typical brute Banite Sith, but they were identifiers of the royal sect. It should be said that much of the perspective of the Banite Sith from the royal perspective was skewed because of the split. Realistically, these two houses or two sects would profit off of a true connection with each other, but they wouldn't, because this sect was created to hate and, if fortunate enough, destroy the other. Even though the dark side grew stronger within her every day, Satine created the perfect society for Mandalore. She spent the longer part of the next few years constructing a world that could be what the Sith regime needed. The Magistrate was very similar to the overseer of all within the Alliance, as it had been ever since the beginning. Sishi monitored Satine's work, but she very infrequently interfered. The most that would happen between master and apprentice were official state meetings, where they would exchange holocrons, out of Obi-Wan's sight. Because aside from the cultists, who shuffled in and off-world, what Satine used to train the most was herself. Her focus determined her reality, and she, as Mandalore grew, searched for her own apprentice after all this time. Without a rule of two-like structure dominating the lineage, Satine had been free to find a student ever since she believed she was ready. It wasn't until about 4 years before the Blockade of Naboo that she believed she was. Mandalore was growing, her relationship with Kenobi was satisfactory, and her growing relationship with the Alliance was perfect in her eyes. Her hunt for an apprentice had begun prior to the Civil War. Cultists typically did as their masters asked of them, without hesitation. And because she was away for a year with Kenobi during the war, that's what she assigned them to do. Well, they finally found someone, the next step, the perfect pupil, and it came from a world on the no-go zone list. It was an accident, but a new candidate was rising to Naboo's throne. She was very popular and the perfect choice. Naboo was always a weird situation due to the changing monarchy, but an alliance is, after all, an alliance. Padme theoretically should not have been elected for another 4 years, but due to her M count and natural talents, she was too gifted to not be seated on the throne. Satine, as a result, departed for Naboo to meet the young queen herself, and she was unbelievably shocked to learn that Padme Amidala was beyond her own capabilities. 20,000 midichlorian count was too high to just ignore. The magistrate also made it her own personal mission to visit Amidala too. The one problem with Naboo was the advisory board. They could sway the direction of this alliance, but Padme had too high of a potential to pass up on. Thanks to Satine's work with maintaining relationships inside the Jedi Temple, she found other backups that, while not fit for the Jedi Order, were enough of a fit for the Alliance expansion. However, Padme was an odd miss. She was close in proximity to the Jedi and to Palpatine, so why did they completely miss her M count? It had more to do with Palpatine than anything. The Senator of Naboo typically avoided hosting Jedi on Naboo, due to his lair not having been moved to a secretive location. He never picked up on Amidala because she was born in the countryside, and by the time he did sense something, it was more like a passing wind. The royal Sith gave her an amulet the first time they met her, and it became a part of her normal attire. It was a gemstone for her birthday in the Naboo customs, and typically a queen would wear that gem, especially if given by another royal. The amulet acted similarly to the force power that Palpatine, Satine, and Sishi used to conceal their essences. So on first interaction, Palpatine felt the presence of Padme's power, but on second, it was all but absent. It made the Sith apprentice question himself, but he disregarded it altogether. Now with Amidala, like it had been with several other Sith prospects, it was hard to get her into training. Satine was easier due to Mandalore being a warrior society, and her father encouraging it, believing that a war was coming, which he was right about. Padme, like dozens to hundreds of others, was trained through a mixed bag. Sometimes she'd be given martial art practices in alignment with Naboo crown procedures, or what most of her training consisted of was utilizing the Force through extravagant ways. This led to the magistrate taking a keen interest in her development. Satine was free to work on her own, and she had become the powerhouse that she was by training alone. Obi-Wan was always around, but that never stopped her development, and thus Naboo was added to the aligned regime under the magistrate's oversight. The next 3 years or so would see Mandalore rise in popularity as a political powerhouse. Its new booming economy was in perfect condition, its monarch finally tying the knot with someone who had become very popular in the public eye. Duchess and Duke Consort of Mandalore were finally bound to one another, and yet Obi-Wan knew nothing of the truth. He did not know that his partner was a secret Sith, someone who could challenge him in a lightsaber duel. Kenobi barely even used his lightsaber anymore. He was still harmonized with the Force, but left none the wiser to the truth. It was also at this time when a slight shift of plans hit this Sith regime. Magistrate Sishi died in a hyperspace incident. The hyperdrive stalled just as a vessel prepared to jump. Half of the ship ended up in the middle of nowhere, and the rest of the vessel remained at the original location. It was a horrible incident, and it hit the aligned regime pretty hard. She maintained the relations between the powerful systems until Satine could, and now that title was being passed down to the new Sith Lord. Despite Padme being Satine's choice for an apprentice, the Sith Lord could also oversee the development of that student, which is what the magistrate requested to do. Satine now was left with her 13-year-old Padawan and an alliance looking to Mandalore to lead. She thought heavily on how she would make her mark on the regime, because she understood what it took to lead. Frequently, she shadowed the magistrate, and people across the several hundred star systems knew her. The benefit of this alliance is that there were several key planets that relied on aligned systems, so the regime wasn't just planets with royals that were trusted by the Sith, but planets that had no clue they relied on Sith-aligned planets. Satine memorialized her master, and gathered the royals for a mass week of mourning. Everyone present was related to a Sith at one point or another. They buried the Sith Lord at her home planet, and then placed her lightsaber in the Tomb of Royals created by the original Umbaras. Afterwards, Satine would take up the duties of Sith Lord. She would oversee Padme's development, and the relationship would grow tighter. When the Blockade of Naboo came around, Satine believed it to be the moment that the Bainite Sith would reveal themselves fully. Padme was obviously in an unfavorable scenario. But there were alternatives that made this situation far more productive for the Royals. First was the discovery of young Skywalker. Despite Qui-Gon needing a new apprentice following Obi-Wan's abandonment, he and his new student, Imogun-Di, still had to flee Naboo for Tatooine. Padme, inversely, wanted to free the boy, having recognized his importance to the cause, but she played it off until said freedom was won through a pod race and Qui-Gon tomfoolery. Similarly, there would be a return to the system, and Amidala would theorize in a message to her master that Palpatine was a member of the current Sith, the other ones. Kryze was unsure, but she trusted her students' analytical skills. Like her master Satine, when her planet needed her, Padme elected to return with the protection of Qui-Gon and Imogun-Di. A duel would then commence with the Jedi, as Amidala recaptured the palace. In this fight, Qui-Gon would still die, but so would Imogun-Di. This did not result in Maul's victory. The fight went semi-similarly, with Qui-Gon dying early on, and before they could reach the energy shield room, Maul and Imogun-Di killed each other in the plasma energy chambers. Their sabers plunged into their opponents' bodies, and they both fell backwards, off the long catwalks, into the pits. Neither would return following this duel. However, the importance of the Battle of Naboo and the Blockade was the strength and respect it gained from the other planets within the aligned regime. They, like they did with Mandalore, saw a young leader rise from the ashes of civilization and come out on top. The Republic, Jedi, and Senate moved on, but the Sith, the Royal Sith, did not. This turbulent time in Amidala's life would see her accomplish a sort of eternal royalty in the ranks of her people. Because most of the leaders on Naboo were elected, they didn't have a proper royal family. Padme was the first of that kind, and the petitions to amend the Constitution came in from around the system. Padme could become the first lifetime monarch on Naboo, seen in generations. Palpatine suggested she avoid it, and Satine said otherwise. Amidala trusted her master more, and thus remained the monarch. Though there was one concerning question left behind from the Battle of Naboo, the fate of young Skywalker. The Queen knew how important he was, but she wasn't ready to teach yet. She still had so much to learn about the Sith path, and trying to impart that onto another was too much to take. Satine would adopt Anakin, because the Jedi didn't really care about his fate, and Palpatine never got the chance to fully realize his capabilities. Because the Jedi weren't interested in him, aside from Qui-Gon, Palpatine didn't really care either. Before any celebration started on Naboo, Anakin would be sent to Mandalore, where Satine would formally adopt him, and promise to retrieve his mother. Well, what better for a Sith to use than the trauma of losing a parent? Satine understood how to make someone hurt, because she had felt that same pain. She and Obi-Wan would take care of Anakin, and the Duke Consort would arrive on Tatooine just a little too late. If it makes you feel any better, Padme actually returned to Tatooine and murdered both Watto and Shmi. Obi-Wan couldn't believe what he saw, and it broke his heart. And that, along with the recent death of Qui-Gon, made him pick up his saber again. He promised Anakin that he would train him as a Jedi. Even without the promise asked by his own master to keep, Obi-Wan believed he owed it to Qui-Gon to do what he thought Master Jin would want. Satine was very approving of this, even if it meant Skywalker would start his training in the light side of the Force on Mandalore, without anyone knowing but Kenobi and herself. Despite the new adoption, there was also more exciting news for the royal family on Mandalore. Their own child, the heir to the throne, a son named Azda Kryze, was born. And even though the times were exciting, they also would be relatively uneventful for the next couple of years, just how the royal Sith preferred it. After all, it's why they stayed so quiet from the Republic for so long. In the year of 27 BBY, Satine took her sons on a vacation to Barrows. All was going well in her relationship with Obi-Wan. The status quo remained absolute. The 19-year-old Queen Amidala would be joining them. Kenobi was currently assisting the Jedi with myths surrounding a Sith movement in the underground. Kenobi may have not been a Jedi anymore, but he wanted to stop the Sith. The Council appreciated his willingness to act. Satine saw this opportunity as one to introduce both of her sons to the Sith path. Azda, like Padme, wore amulets frequently, which helped coax him naturally into the dark side. Obi-Wan wasn't stupid, so don't misconstrue that, but what the Sith did with their artifacts and gems would be closer related to witchcraft and dark magic. It's how so much of their path was shrouded in secrecy. Asda was still a little boy, only 5 years old, so he wasn't starting his training yet. Anything he did do was only with his mother. Anakin was a much different case. Obi-Wan taught him the basics, and Satine swept in and helped him focus on his anger. Anakin always wondered why Obi-Wan never taught him that, and Satine made a lie about Anakin's new father, as all good Sith know how to do. Satine expressed that her dearest Obi-Wan feared the dark side. As a former Jedi, it was ingrained into him by a trauma inflicted by the Jedi Order. So she suggested that their lessons be kept quiet until Obi-Wan could break free from that spell. It was a strong way for Anakin to develop trust with his new motherly figure, while also learn the fullest extent of the Force taught by her. The Royal Sith had since figured out that Dooku had joined Palpatine's Bainite lineage, and plans were being created by Master and Apprentice to oust Chancellor Palpatine from power. He was in too much control, but they had plans. Systems like Raxus were buckling, looking for new planets to align with. Even without royalty, the regime very easily could be influential in this situation. Regardless of what the regal Sith were capable of, here on Barros, Satine reunited with her apprentice. Anakin finally got to see Padme again, and Asda, like his older brother, would experience the ancient mausoleum for the first time. Similar to the temple on Morabon, the original created this for future generations. Every relic stored inside this home helped the Sith become more powerful, helped them fuel their focus into creating something long-lasting and efficient. It was a religious experience for the boys. Tears were shed, emotions felt. They were connecting to their ancient ancestors. That's how this royal lineage felt. It was a found family, and sure, that sounds wholesome, but it's not. They're still Sith, just searching for success rather than secrecy. This journey would be very impactful for the boys. It would further develop Anakin's crush on Padme as well. Yeah, still a weird age gap, I didn't come up with the numbers, but these feelings were not quite mutual. Padme was focused on finding her own apprentice out in the galaxy and expanding the Sith regime. She didn't really care that Anakin spoke of her frequently. They of course were familiar with each other due to royal outings and galas, but those weren't frequent events. However, problems started to arise when the family returned to Mandalore. Obi-Wan didn't realize it, but the Jedi and himself had been tracking the wrong Sith lineage. They were following Satine and Amidala, not the Bainites. He didn't draw a connection to her, but he did recognize that perhaps he had been led astray. So instead of having an argument or debate, especially in front of Anakin and Asda, they took a short trip to Kalevala, Satine's home planet and castle, where all of her own Sith relics resided. Also, it should be mentioned, but Satine had already killed off Pre Vizsla and her sister too. Bo was dead to her the minute she abandoned her, and so when Bo showed up, serving a rival Mandalorian, she paid the price in blood. Regardless, inside Castle Kryze, Obi-Wan explained all of his suspicions, what he found, what the Jedi found, everything. And she, instead of denying it, only nodded her head and confirmed the truth. What did she have to hide? Satine did not fear him. He only started training 5 years ago again. She'd been doing it since she was old enough to count. Obi-Wan's heart dropped as she told him every single painful detail about who he really married. She was a Sith. She was the Sith Lord. And what he had been following was not related to her or the royal lineage. Obi-Wan was hunting the Bainite lineage, and the culprits were of his own Jedi path. Dooku, Qui-Gon Jinn's master, was one of them. Palpatine, the former senator of Naboo, was the other. Satine paced around her husband as he searched for emotions to use, or actions to act upon. He looked at Satine and asked how she could do this, how she could lie about herself, and she didn't. She literally just told him the truth. Everything he wanted to know was just told. She then got close to him, resting her hand ever so gently atop his on his lightsaber. She then reminded him of that same truth. His adopted son, who he loved, was a Sith. His own firstborn was a Sith. The society he helped rebuild was for the Sith, and his wife was one too. Someone he loved for more than half of his life was everything he hated. She twisted the dagger deeper, because he had no choice here. He could kill her, that was an option, and she dared him to. But what would his children think of him? What would the galaxy think of a Jedi who killed the Duchess of Mandalore? Ozda would grow up resenting his father, because his father killed his one and only mother. Anakin was close enough in age and skill to beating Obi-Wan anyways. It was only a matter of the right strike, as she called it. And Kenobi didn't have the heart to kill his own wife and then his son, did he? She got closer to him, pressing the figurative dagger deeper into his heart. Everything he was a Sith. If he wanted true control, then he would tell the Jedi about Palpatine and Dooku. Or he would watch the Jedi be consumed, and he too would lose his life beside her throne. No one cares about a disobedient Duke consort, and the children, well, wouldn't they be filled with disgust once they learn that their father was cheating on their mother with a member of the Mandalorian clergy? So she raised her hand with her wedding band on it and told him to kiss the ring, or be consumed as the Jedi soon would be. She stepped backwards, eyeing him the entire time. Not a moment did she break eye contact, let alone blink. When she reached appropriate distance and Obi-Wan still hadn't acted, her hand lowered from her chest height to knee height. Obi-Wan's world shattered around him. Kiss the ring. It was that simple. Everything he spent his life training for, to defeat the Sith, was gone. 18 years of Jedi instruction and another decade of love for what? He might as well be slain right here and right now, but no. He just asked one question. Did she love him? Was any of it real? Satine twisted her head slightly and asked if what he knew about the Sith was true, and what she said she could do at a moment's notice were too. Would she have spared him? Her stance did not change, her body as stiff as Beskar. Though what she said did not fully answer his question. Did she love what she could use him for? Did she love what he could gift or the image of what they could represent? Did she actually love him? And that answer would weigh on his thoughts, as he forced himself to the conclusion he hoped to be true. He fell to his knees and kissed the ring. Moments later, he'd be helped up, and his communication device planted gently into his hand. He could tell the Jedi, but that would award Palpatine the perfect chance to destroy the Order. There was no winning, and that was how Satine designed it. She didn't want him to find a resolution because she was a Sith. This was concocted entirely during their time on Concordia as teens. She knew what she could do, and she did it, and thus Obi-Wan told the Jedi about Dooku and Palpatine. They were tied to the invasion of Naboo, the death of Qui-Gon, and the return of the Sith. He used his evidence against the royal house lineage against Dooku, and simply connected it back to Palpatine. While the events that will later be mentioned unfolded, Padme had her own very important role to fulfill. Thanks to guidance from the magistrate and her current master, she had a full grasp on the political landscape of the royal regime. There were hundreds of star systems looking towards a leader. Satine had already cultivated them, but having someone else, someone new to the field with an interest in aggressive expansion, was a welcome face. Satine wasn't present for the discussions for unlisted reasons, which no one minded. But due to what consumed the Republic, Padme's suggestions and requests went by a lot easier thanks to her master. The kingdoms, the systems, the royalty of the coalition needed protection. Their formal and historical alliances put into place a perfect network to expand into a new superpower in the galaxy. But they were missing some key factors. Firstly, a military, and secondly, an official parliament of representation. Padme proposed to do away with any Republic senators and create a new government for their own people. Thanks to 100 years of shipbuilding at Mon Calamari and depositing this secret massive fleet at the Barrow system, off of the third unpopulated planet orbiting their sun, they already had a navy. The relations established at Scipio in earlier years allowed this regime to force the banking clans to break the Republic with interest rates, with set prices established by this monarchy. And what else? Oh, the fall of the Republic. Padme didn't propose all-out war, but a seizure of systems, assets, trade routes, or people just looking for protection from the Republic. These Sith were not simply proactively creating a coalition, they were destroying the Republic, the Jedi, and their rivals, which is what Padme was coming off the back of. Thanks to Obi-Wan kissing the ring, the Jedi made a somewhat aggressive move on Republic leadership. People died, it was an overall mess. Similar things happened to Dooku. The population, as a result, had an uproar, and even though there was legitimate support for the Jedi, with their provided evidence, it transformed into a Republic civil war. Leading future separatist planets like Onderon and Raxus searched for help. Without Dooku, they had no one. The Alliant regime could be that someone, a place for people to escape the civil war. Now, it would be foolish to say that none of the planets within the alignment didn't have militaries. The Sith had been in and around these places for 3 centuries. Of course, there were militias, armies, and navies. But this wasn't widespread. These were just active militant groups at this point. And yes, also, of course, Mandalore followed their same tradition of warrior paths. Padme spoke with elegance and inspired the systems to unite, to finally separate from the Republic and create their own parliament, as the Jedi accidentally sent the galaxy into turmoil. This relationship was a really easy transition based off of 300 years of trust. These planets all trusted each other and they were all kind of married to one another. So it allowed them to very easily transition into a new system. The chaos that engulfed the Republic was hard for many to process, because it was sudden. But there was a certain fear about the Sith from the Jedi, which led to their reaction. The fact that 2 of them died to 1 created a sense of worry for the High Council. They didn't just doubt the existence of the Sith or their capabilities, they recognized that they were warriors still. While their move on Palpatine and Dooku might have seemed rash, they trusted Kenobi, and that was why Satine recruited him. The relationship between he and the Jedi would always be strong. She never had the foresight to see that they would discover her sect, but the initial planning that went into this is why it was a success. Because of the Civil War, that slowly got more extreme due to the rising tensions started by Palpatine's administration, it was easier for the regime to isolate systems and offer them protection from the raging conflict. It was also here where the influence the regime had over the banking clans at Scipio showed itself the most. They took advantage over the megacorporations and systems, attempting to create their own defenses and militaries and so forth. This was with interest rate spikes. It would be the conflict to split the Republic up. Powerful little coalitions would form after the war, and they'd be left in the shadow of the new regime. And while the Royal Sith lineage created a galactic power, it was in an unfavorable position. It wrapped around Hutt space and interweaved throughout the Outer Rim. However, that aforementioned relationship with the Zagirians really carried their weight with maintaining neutrality around these other groups. Padme's development as a Sith would continue. As reigning monarch over Naboo, she was almost untouchable, and because she navigated them away from another conflict, the people felt validated in their choice to amend the Constitution. She protected them twice, and with their position in the alignment, they were new favorites amongst the classic royal houses. Eventually, about 10 years down the line, Amidala would end up falling for Anakin. By that point, he was in his late 20s and she was in her early 30s, a lot less weird. It was also a much better scenario, and due to the galactic turmoil, it gave Anakin more room to develop as a Sith, and be positioned to rule his own kingdom. But he would end up falling under Naboo's jurisdiction rather than Mandalore's, which Satine was perfectly fine with. The first heir, Azda Kryze, would grow into a powerful Sith. Created by 2 extremely gifted beings, he was close to his older brother, but still existed in Anakin's shadow with an M count. That did not bother him. Azda was destined to rule Mandalore, to take his mother's throne as Duke, and hold a pivotal role in the alignment. Obi-Wan went through a stage of grief following his surrender to the throne, but eventually he actually found it within himself to see the Jedi for what they really were. Qui-Gon's death, Dooku's failure, was a result of their complacency, and he knew one thing for certain. Satine did not have any intentions to kill Qui-Gon. She actually respected him, for Jedi. Their relationship would bear another heir, though their daughter would not take Mandalore's throne. Thania Kryze would grow up under a much different Mandalorian regime than Anakin or Azda. She would take part in the classic warrior ideologies of their people. As her father embraced the dark side, Thania would take part in classic warrior ideologies of their people. Kenobi and Satine would lead separate campaigns on neighboring systems that refused to lead the Republic. The most populated and wealthy system would go to their daughter. Thania, like Azda and Anakin, had huge shoes to fill, and that pressure would build on her as she got older. Padme and Anakin would have their own children, and similarly, their twin daughters would receive separate lands. The first daughter receiving Naboo, and the second taking Malastare, with a combined military of Naboo and Gungan fighters. With the Republic and Jedi crumbling to civil war, and the Sith rising quietly, without a peep, the royal lineage would sprout unlike ever before. The traditional, unselfish structure created by the original would remain in place for generations. It would be the current Sith Lords, Satine and Padme, that would establish roots to making sure that anyone who followed the Bainite lineage or attempted to use strength to gain power felt the wrath for their actions of betrayal. This was the new Sith Empire. Quiet, brooding, manipulative, and ironically prospering off the failures of the Bainite rule of two. And that, my friends, is a dark and twisted story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this psychotic story.
So that's what y'all want to see, huh?
First things first. You guys keep asking for the dark stories, and you're surprised that I go this dark. It's a dark story. So I'm gonna talk about Obi-Wan first because I'm sure quite a few people are not thrilled about that, but he let her die for no reason. Karma's a bitch. Anyways, the story itself was really challenging. A lot of the story had to be kind of exposition-like, because there's not really a way to tell a story about a different Sith sect without just, keeping the Bainite, and I didn't want to keep it the Bainite. I wanted there to actually be this really big irony, is that the way the Bainite Sith are perceived in this story is as brutes, as kind of stupid and dull, and that's just because the original perceives them that way because he was betrayed by them. So a lot of the perspective, it's like an unreliable narrator. A lot of the perspective, as I do with most of these stories anyways, is, show a perspective from this one side, and this one side sees the Bainite Sith as just, stupid, basically. And the irony is that the reason most of this works is because the Bainite Sith did something. Without the Bainite Sith, I don't think that the rise of this royal lineage would have happened within this lifetime. I think it would have happened eventually, but not within this lifetime. I wanted the Bainite Sith and the royal lineage of Sith to be really similar. So they're going to come out really similar, they're going to sound really similar, that's because they are. Their roots are the same. And the focus of using royal houses and kingdoms and stuff like that was a lot of fun. I saw an idea in the Discord for like a what if Star Wars was medieval, like not like what if medieval times, but like Star Wars characters were just medieval times. And that influence is a little present here because it's a fun idea, the kingdoms, the royal heirs, all that stuff. And the idea of building a literal royal Sith family was a lot of fun. Corrupting Obi-Wan, tons of fun. I know last time I killed him off, and honestly, I almost did it here, but I kind of was like, the Kiss the Ring scene was kind of inspired from Dune a little bit. I thought that would fit in this circumstance, where Satine is actually, it's not actually said in the story, and I'm leaving up for you to interpret. My interpretation is that she actually does love him, which is why she didn't kill him. She is a Sith, after all. It would make sense for her to kill him, but she doesn't because she actually cares about him. But she lets the choice be his, as I think a Sith that actually cares about someone would do. I feel like removing Obi-Wan from the lineup also changes the story significantly, and I like the idea of Anakin just kind of, after the Battle of Naboo, the Jedi are like, alright, see you kid, have a good one, and then he's just abducted into the Sith, and I mean, it just progressively gets worse for the Jedi. With each respective Sith Lord, I wanted to kind of play to their specialities. Amidala is the one that kind of fully unifies the coalition to mounting up a military. Not even that they're going to war against the Republic, just mounting a military. That Padme is able to sway so many people in that kind of environment, whereas Satine kind of maintains a status quo in that environment. So the Magistrate, Satine kind of maintain a status quo, and Satine's focus is more emotional manipulation, whereas Padme's is more structural or political manipulation. So just a way to kind of balance the two of them out and make both of them feel both unique, and then kind of have them have their own separate influences on the story that directly impact how this lineage succeeds so well. So I hope you all enjoyed this dark story. Don't be surprised that it's pretty grim. I just somehow managed to keep going darker, and honestly, I kind of want to see how far I go. Let's see how far I go. I could go further. It could be fun. It could be a lot of fun for all of us. Well, not, if your favorite character is killed, but, Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love, and always, remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.